There is a moment, and you know exactly which one I'm talking about, where someone who used to fill every silence with your name simply stops. And in that stillness, in that absence of sound, something far more devastating than any argument begins to live inside you. Because silence is never empty. Silence is the loudest form of communication the human psyche has ever invented. And most people are completely, catastrophically unprepared for what it's actually saying. Here's what no one tells you. The people who go quiet on you are not resting. They are working. Something is happening beneath the surface of that silence that is more deliberate, more loaded, and more psychologically complex than anything they could have screamed at you in a moment of rage. And the terrifying part? A part of you already knows this. A part of you has always known this. But you've been doing something very human, very unconscious and very dangerous. You've been filling that silence with the story you needed to hear, rather than the truth you could not afford to face. But here's the truth. That story you've been telling yourself, it is a defense mechanism. It is your psyche pulling the curtain closed on something it isn't ready to process. The mind is not designed to sit comfortably inside ambiguity. It was built for answers, for resolution, for the tribal certainty of knowing where you stand with the people around you. So when silence arrives, sudden, unexplained, thick with implication, your subconscious doesn't pause and reflect. It fabricates. It invents. It reaches into the archive of your oldest fears and pulls out an explanation that fits the shape of your deepest wound. And this is where it gets dangerous, because the story you invent inside someone else's silence is never really about them. It is a mirror, a brutal, unfiltered mirror held up to the interior of your own unresolved emotional architecture. The person who goes silent is handing you a key without knowing it, a key to a room inside yourself that you have spent years locking, decorating the door so no one would think to look, convincing yourself the room didn't exist at all. But the silence finds the door. The silence always finds the door. Most people don't see this. Most people are so consumed by the external puzzle. Why are they quiet? What did I do? What do they want? That they never turn inward to ask the question that matters infinitely more. Why does their silence feel like this? Why does it feel like confirmation of something? Why does it land not just in your chest, but in something deeper, something older, something that was hurting long before this person ever entered your life? Think about what silence does to your body, not metaphorically, physically. The chest tightens, the mind accelerates, sleep becomes shallow and fragmented. You rehearse conversations that never happened. You replay memories, dissecting them for clues, rewinding moments, and watching them frame by frame, as though you are a forensic analyst of your own emotional destruction. And underneath all of that frantic mental motion is something you are desperately trying not to feel. Something still, something cold, something that whispers, "I was never safe here. I was never truly wanted. This is what I always knew would happen." But here's the truth. That whisper is not intuition. That whisper is a wound speaking. That whisper is the echoed voice of every moment in your history where silence was used as a weapon against you, where absence meant abandonment, where being ignored meant you were not worth acknowledging. Your nervous system has catalogued every instance where someone's quiet was a precursor to loss. And now, the moment any significant person in your life goes silent, your entire emotional body goes on a kind of primal, prehistoric alert. This is what the subconscious does. This is its primary function, in fact, not to enlighten you, not to guide you toward wisdom, but to protect you from repetition of pain. It pattern matches. It says, last time there was silence like this, it ended badly. So we prepare, we armor, we preemptively grieve. And in doing so, it manufactures suffering before suffering has even arrived. Your body is living in a past experience while standing in the present moment. And the cruel irony is that this very mechanism, designed to protect you, is the thing that makes the silence unbearable. It is you, not them, who is generating most of the torment. Most people don't see this. They look outward. They fixate on the silent person. They try to decode, to diagnose, to force resolution, through texts that go unanswered, through conversations that feel like pulling teeth, through the exhausting theater of acting unbothered when everything inside them is screaming. All of that energy, all of that desperate outward reaching, is a strategy to avoid going inward. Because inward is where the real silence lives, not the silence of another person, the silence of the self, the interior quiet that holds everything you refuse to acknowledge about what you truly need, what you truly fear, and what you have never truly resolved. And here is the open wound at the center of all of this. The silence of another person only destroys you if there is already a hollow place inside you that it fits perfectly into. Like a key and a lock, like a wound and a blade shaped exactly to its dimensions. You are not just reacting to their absence, you are reacting to everything their absence confirms about a story you've been secretly writing about yourself for years. And what is that story? What is the brutal subconscious narrative that someone's silence feeds so precisely, so devastatingly, that you cannot sleep, cannot think, cannot be still? That is the question that lives behind every unanswered message, behind every unexplained withdrawal, behind every room that suddenly feels colder because someone stopped filling it with warmth. The question is not, why are they silent? The question is, what does their silence make you believe about yourself? And the answer to that question, the real answer, not the comfortable one, is the thing you have been running from your entire emotional life. There is a type of silence that is not passive. It is active, surgical, and chosen with extraordinary precision. It knows where you are most vulnerable. It knows exactly how much pressure to apply and exactly where. Not because the person deploying it is cruel, though sometimes they are, but because every silence in a relationship is shaped by the architecture of that relationship itself. And every relationship is a mirror of every relationship that came before it, which means the silence that is breaking you right now has roots that go back further than you ever imagined, further than this person, further than this situation, back to the first time someone's absence made you question your own worth. Here's what the subconscious never tells you directly. It does not distinguish between then and now. It does not have a calendar. It does not understand that you are no longer a child waiting for a parent who never came home emotionally. It does not register that you are no longer standing outside a closed door, small and bewildered, trying to understand what you did wrong. Your subconscious carries every emotional wound with the same intensity as the day it was created, preserved in a kind of psychological amber, unchanged, unprocessed, waiting for a trigger that matches the original shape of the pain. And silence is the perfect trigger, because silence was likely the first weapon ever used against you, before you had language to name what was happening, before you could articulate the difference between safety and danger. When you were most biologically dependent on the emotional availability of others, that was when silence first taught you that you were not guaranteed to be held, not guaranteed to be seen, not guaranteed to matter enough to someone to make them stay present with you. And this is where it gets dangerous. That lesson did not leave. That lesson became architecture. It built itself into the way you attach to people, the way you interpret their behavior, the way you respond to ambiguity in close relationships. It created what could be called a deep emotional script, a set of invisible instructions that run beneath every conscious interaction, whispering to you about what is real, what is safe, what is inevitable. And one of the most powerful instructions in that script is this: when someone goes silent, it is because you are not enough. Say that again. Really let it land. When someone goes silent, it is because you are not enough. Not because they are overwhelmed, not because they are processing, not because life is complicated and people sometimes retreat inside themselves for reasons that have nothing to do with you. The script doesn't entertain any of those possibilities. The script goes directly to the verdict: insufficient, unworthy, about to be abandoned. Most people don't see this pattern for what it is because they are completely identified with it. They don't experience it as a wound running a program. They experience it as reality. They experience it as accurate perception. And so they do what any reasonable person does when they perceive a threat. They react. They pursue. They over-explain, over-apologize, over-accommodate. Or they do the opposite. They shut down. They withdraw. They build a wall and start rearranging their interior so that when the inevitable rejection comes, at least it won't destroy the most vital parts of them. Both of these responses are catastrophically misaligned with what is actually happening. Because what is actually happening, beneath the silence, beneath the reaction, beneath the surface behavior of both people, is a collision of two subconscious systems trying to protect their hosts from the unbearable terror of emotional exposure. One person goes quiet because something inside them needs space, or safety, or control, because somewhere in their history, being emotionally available led to pain, and silence became the one place they could exist without being wounded. And the other person, the one for whom silence is unbearable, panics because somewhere in their history, someone's withdrawal meant irreversible loss. Two wounds, two completely different shapes, pressed together in the most intimate possible configuration. And neither person is consciously aware that this is what is happening. This is the tragedy. Not the silence itself, but the invisibility of the forces producing it. The way two people can stand in the same room, in the same silence, and each be imprisoned by an entirely different ghost. You think their silence is about you. They think your reaction to their silence is an attack on them. And the gap between those two misperceptions, that gap is where relationships die, quietly, without ceremony, without either person ever understanding what actually happened. But here's the truth. Something in you has suspected this for a long time. Something in you has known, with a horrible, creeping certainty, that the silence you fear most is not coming from outside. It is coming from inside. The deepest silence you are running from is not another person's. It is yours. The conversation you cannot start, the feeling you cannot name, the acknowledgement you have been avoiding with all of the considerable energy your psyche can generate. You are afraid of what lives in your own quiet, because in the space between the noise, between the distraction and the scrolling and the relentless occupation of your attention with other people's silences, something waits for you. Something that has been waiting for years. A reckoning with what you actually need, what you actually feel, what you have actually been experiencing beneath every performance of composure you have given the world. Expose hidden fears. That phrase sounds clinical until you understand what it actually means in practice. It means the thing you are most afraid others will see in you is usually the thing you are most afraid to see in yourself. The fear of being abandoned is also the fear of acknowledging how much you need. The fear of being ignored is also the fear of admitting how desperately you want to be known. The fear of silence is also the fear of what your own interior contains, the grief, the longing, the rage, the tenderness you have never allowed yourself to fully inhabit. You protect yourself from your own interior by externalizing the threat. You make it about them. You make it about the silence outside rather than the silence inside. And in doing so, you give away the only real power you have ever had, the power of self-knowledge, the power of understanding the mechanism that drives your suffering, not to eliminate the suffering, but to stop being its unconscious passenger. Because here is what the subconscious fears more than any external silence. It fears being seen. Not by others, by you, by the part of you that is watching, always watching, that knows when the story you're telling yourself is a defense rather than a truth. That part of you is never silent. That part of you is generating the most relentless, most uncomfortable, most important sound in your entire emotional life. And you have been turning the volume down on it for years. The question is no longer, what does their silence mean? The question is, are you willing to stop, to go inward, to sit inside your own quiet, long enough to hear what has been trying to reach you from the deepest room of who you are? Because what is waiting there is not what you expect. You have been managing yourself for so long that you have forgotten what it feels like to simply be yourself. Every interaction, every conversation, every moment of potential intimacy, you are curating. You are performing a version of yourself designed to minimize the probability of exactly the kind of silence you fear most. You have become extraordinarily skilled at being palatable, at being what seems needed, at filling space in ways that make others comfortable. Because somewhere along the way you learned, with a terrifying precision, that your authentic emotional expression is dangerous. That too much of you is too much. That the real version, the unfiltered version, the version that bleeds and aches and needs and longs, that version will drive people away. And so you learn to compress yourself, to edit, to present only the portions of your interior that seemed likely to be received without consequence. And then over time you forgot that you were doing this. The compression became so habitual, so automatic, so woven into the fabric of your daily functioning that it stopped feeling like suppression and started feeling like personality. But here's the truth, that compression has a cost. And that cost is being collected right now in the currency of relationships that never quite reach the depth you hunger for, in the recurring sensation that you are somehow slightly alone, even in the company of people who love you, in the way that other people's silence lands not just as absence, but as confirmation of what you have always half believed to be the truth about you. This is where repression does its most sophisticated and destructive work. Not in the dramatic moments, not in the obvious crises, but in the subtle architecture of a life built around the avoidance of the very thing that could heal it. Because the thing you are most compressed around, the feeling you are most trained to suppress, is also the thing that connects you to others at the level that would make their silence genuinely survivable. Genuine emotional exposure, the willingness to be fully, vulnerably, uncomfortably present in your need. And this is where it gets dangerous, not for the other person, but for you. Because the longer you suppress the authentic interior, the more violently the subconscious begins to find other ways to express it. Repression is not elimination. You cannot destroy emotional content by refusing to acknowledge it. You can only redirect it, force it underground. And underground it transforms, from something that could be spoken into something that is acted out. From a feeling into a pattern. From a wound into a weapon you are using on yourself without knowing it. The anxiety you feel when someone goes quiet, that is repressed longing, looking for an exit. The rage that rises when you feel ignored, that is compressed grief, wearing an armor it built to survive. The coldness you adopt when you feel unsafe in intimacy, that is the terrified, tender part of yourself, building a wall made from every time vulnerability led to loss. These are not character flaws, they are not evidence of being broken. They are the completely logical, devastatingly effective survival strategies of an interior that was once genuinely unsafe and has never been fully convinced that safety has arrived. Most people don't see this because the disguise is too convincing. The anxiety looks like overthinking. The grief looks like irritability. The wall looks like independence. The entire elaborate system of psychological defense presents itself as personality, and the world reflects it back to you as who you are. And at some point you begin to believe that this architecture is you, rather than understanding it as a temporary structure built during a time of genuine emergency, which has long since outlived its usefulness and is now the primary obstacle between you and the life you actually want. Here is the devastating irony of it all. The very defense mechanisms that were designed to protect you from pain are the thing generating your pain. The wall you built to keep abandonment out is the thing keeping connection at the exact distance that makes you feel most alone. The silence you armor yourself in when you feel unsafe is teaching others that you don't need them, which creates exactly the withdrawal you were protecting against. The script runs flawlessly, reliably, producing the same outcome across different faces, different contexts, different decades of your life, until you recognize it not as reality but as repetition. Because this is what the subconscious does with unprocessed pain. it recreates it, not out of masochism, out of the desperate primal need for resolution. The psyche is trying with every repetition to rewrite the ending. It keeps staging the same essential scenario, hoping that this time something different will happen. This time, the silence will break. This time, the person will stay. This time, you will not be left alone with the part of yourself that doesn't know how to exist without the reassurance of being chosen. But the scenario cannot resolve from the outside. The silence cannot be broken by the other person's speech. The wound cannot be healed by the right person loving you in exactly the right way. It can be soothed by that, yes. The right love is not meaningless. But soothing is not healing. Soothing is managing the symptom while the source continues its quiet, relentless operation in the dark. And the source is this: a belief installed so early and so deeply that it predates language, predates memory as you consciously experience it, predates your ability to contest it with reason or evidence, a belief that your interior, your authentic, uncompressed, fully feeling interior, is fundamentally too much, or not enough, or dangerous, or unworthy of being met with presence and care. That belief is not the truth, but it has been running your life as though it were. And here is the near breaking point, the moment of genuine psychological reckoning that most people do everything in their power to avoid. You will not find freedom from this pattern by changing the people around you. You will not find it by finally receiving the silence-breaking message, the explanation, the apology that you have decided would resolve everything. You will not find it by achieving enough or becoming enough, or curating yourself into a version so palatable that no one could ever reasonably choose to withdraw from you. You will find it, if you find it, only by going into the room inside yourself that you have been locking since the first time someone's silence taught you that your feelings were a problem. Not to destroy what you find there, not to fix it or manage it or transform it into something more presentable, but simply to acknowledge it, to finally let the part of you that has been waiting, sometimes for decades, to be witnessed, to be fully known by the only person who has ever had complete access to it, yourself. And that simple, terrifying, completely necessary act of interior honesty is the thing your subconscious has been trying to prevent you from doing since the very beginning. The question now is whether you are ready to stop letting it. Here is what has been true the entire time, what sits beneath every layer of pattern and defense and subconscious narrative we have traveled through, the thing that this entire architecture of psychological complexity has been working to both protect and conceal simultaneously. You are afraid of your own depth, not of other people's judgment, not of rejection from outside. At the most fundamental level, in the core that your subconscious guards with every mechanism at its disposal, you are afraid of what you would find if you truly, fully, without distraction or defense, descended into your own interior and stayed there long enough to hear everything that is living there. Because here is the climax of this psychological truth, the full exposure that has been building since the very first sentence. Every silence that has ever devastated you was a mirror. Every person who ever withdrew from you and left you in agony was showing you, with painful and exquisite precision, exactly where your relationship with yourself is broken. Not because you are damaged beyond repair, not because your wounds make you lesser, but because the devastation that external silence creates in you is perfectly calibrated to the internal silence you have been maintaining about your own needs, your own worth, your own desires, your own grief. The collapse of illusion begins here. In this sentence, in this recognition, you have been looking outside for evidence that you are worthy of being held, of being chosen, of being stayed for, of being spoken to rather than silenced. Because you have never fully assembled that evidence from within, you have been outsourcing your sense of interior legitimacy to other people's behavior. If they speak, you are worthy. If they go quiet, you are not. You have handed people a power over your psychological reality that belongs to no one but you. And in handing that power away, in making other people the arbiters of your interior worth, You have created a life in which any withdrawal, any unexplained quiet, any moment of emotional unavailability from another person becomes an existential threat rather than simply a human moment. This is the hidden meaning behind their silence, not what they meant, what you decided it meant. What part of you, the oldest, most frightened, most unprocessed part, needed it to mean in order to maintain the story it has been telling about who you are and what you deserve? And here is the final, irrevocable truth of it all. The defense mechanisms collapse in the face of this one recognition. The silence was never about you. It was never proof. It was never the verdict your subconscious made it into. Their silence was their silence, a product of their own architecture, their own history, their own interior weather. You pulled it into your wound and let it confirm what you had already decided was true. You let a stranger's silence become the narrator of your self-concept, and that is not suffering that was done to you. That is suffering that your own psychological machinery created, using their silence as raw material. This is not blame, this is power. Because if the meaning was something you generated, it is also something you can change. Not through denial, not through the hollow positive thinking that papers over the wound without ever addressing it, but through the terrifying, necessary, life-altering process of going into the interior silence, your silence, and beginning, perhaps for the first time, to listen to it without immediately running. What has it been saying? Beneath the noise of every obsessive spiral, every rehearsed conversation, every frantic attempt to decode another person's withdrawal, what has the deeper, quieter voice been saying? The one that doesn't speak in thoughts but in body sensations, in recurring dreams, in the specific texture of the ache that shows up every time someone pulls away. It has been saying, I am here. I have always been here. I have been waiting. It has been saying, the love you are chasing outward is the love you have been withholding from yourself inward. It has been saying, you do not need their voice to break the silence. You need yours. The final illusion that collapses is this, that resolution lives outside you, that the right person speaking, the right explanation arriving, the right silence finally breaking, will give you the peace you have been seeking. It won't. Not because peace is impossible, but because peace was never located where you've been looking for it. It was located in the place you have been most carefully, most exhaustingly, most expertly avoiding your entire life. The interior quiet. Your interior quiet. The silence inside yourself that is not emptiness, not absence, not proof of unworthiness, but the deepest, most foundational truth of what you actually are beneath every wound, every defense, every story, every desperate reaching outward for a sound that can only, ultimately, come from within. Their silence revealed nothing about you that you did not already know, at some subterranean level, about yourself. The only question that has ever mattered, the only one that contains the actual answer, is the one you have been the most unwilling to ask. What would you hear if you finally got quiet enough to listen? The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely.